Good day to you, dear friends. The five aggregates and the five aggregates attached to lust, hatred, and delusion. They are called Panchaskandha and Panchopadanaskandha in Pali language. We often hear these words in the Buddha's teachings, and this is one of the ways of describing our life and our world. In other words, five aggregates describe how our mind identifies stimuli and how our mind plans to respond to them. Therefore, if we have a right understanding of the five aggregates, we can easily understand Buddhism. So let us study them in detail. All of us have got a body and a mind. We have got them as a result of the energy we produce in our past lives. Although the basic structure and the function of the human's body seem to be the same, what we experience in our life varies from person to person, and they depend on the energy we produced by our wholesome and unwholesome activities in the past. In other words, we can observe a lot of differences among the people in our society. For example, healthy, unhealthy, long lived, short lived, wise, foolish, kind, wicked, and so on. We have owned these differences as a result of the energy we produce by our wholesome and unwholesome activities in the past. According to Buddhism, all the beings are composed of five aggregates. They are the aggregate of forms, the aggregate of feelings, the aggregate of perceptions, the aggregate of volitions, and the aggregate of consciousness. These aggregates change so fast that they are observed as one unit. The five aggregates can be divided into two groups. They are called forms and mind. Forms include visuals, sounds, smells, tastes, touches, and thoughts. Mind includes feelings, perceptions, volitions, and consciousness. When a form contacts its corresponding sense organ, mind gets activated and identifies the form. There are four steps in this process. They are the feeling, perception, volition, and consciousness. Suppose you see a flower, then your mind gathers data of it, such as color, shape, size, and past memories, and finally identifies its variety as a rose, a sunflower, a lotus, and so on. Similarly, we identify sounds, smells, tastes, touches, and thoughts when they contact their corresponding sense organs. Suppose you hear some sound, then your mind identifies the sound as a sound of some musical instrument, voice of a person, cry of an animal, singing of a bird, noise of a machine, and so on. Suppose you smell some odor. Your mind identifies it as a smell of a flower, a chemical, a rotten thing, and so on. Suppose you eat something, then your mind identifies it as sweet one, bitter one, sour one, salty one, and so on. Suppose you touch something, then your mind identifies its hardness, softness, and so on. When a thought comes into your mind identifies it as a good thought, a bad thought, and so on. In this manner, we identify stimuli which contact our sense organs because of the function of the five aggregates. After that, our mind plans to respond to stimuli. Responses can be physical, verbal, or mental. This process occurs at every moment of our life. Now let us see how do the five aggregates attached to lust, hatred, or delusion form. After identification of forms, namely visual, sounds, smells, tastes, touches, and thoughts, ordinary people attach to pleasant things with lust, unpleasant things with hatred, and neutral things with delusion. Then the five aggregates become the five aggregates attached to lust, hatred, or delusion. They can be called sensual pleasures or gratification. Now let us study the five aggregates in detail because it is useful to understand the Buddha's teachings well. The five aggregates are as follows: the aggregate of forms, the aggregate of feelings, the aggregate of perceptions, the aggregate of volitions, and the aggregate of consciousness. The aggregate of forms, all the living things and non-living things are called forms. Forms are made of four great elements, namely solidity, liquidity, heat, and gas, and their derivatives, namely color, smell, taste, and nutriments. Some examples of forms: our body and parts of the body, plants and their parts, water, soil, hills, houses, clothes, air, and so on. In short, all the living and non-living things are forms. There are 6 kinds of forms. They are the visuals, sounds, smells, tastes, touches, and thoughts. Each form has 11 types. They are the internal forms, external forms, closed forms, distant forms, pleasant forms, unpleasant forms, soft forms, hard forms, past forms, present forms, and future forms. Now let us study these 11 types of forms in detail. Internal forms. They are the eye, ear, nose, tongue, body, and mind. External forms. They are the visuals, sounds, smells, tastes, touches, and thoughts. Closed forms. These are the forms which are near us. Distant forms. These are the forms which are far from us. Pleasant forms. These are the forms which give us pleasant feelings. Examples: pleasant visuals such as pleasant people, beautiful flowers; pleasant sounds, tasty foods; comfortable touches, and pleasant thoughts. Unpleasant forms. These are the forms which give us unpleasant feelings. Examples: visuals of rotten things such as rotten dead bodies, unpleasant people, unpleasant noises, harsh words, bad smells, bitter tastes, rough touches, and sad thoughts. Soft forms. These are the things that we can't catch with our hands. Examples: air and smoke. Hard forms. These are things that we can catch with our hands. Examples: solid objects such as tables, chairs, soil, parts of our body, and parts of plants. Past forms. These are the memories of our past. An average person can recall some of the things in their childhood, such as toys, books, friends, places they visited, and so on. Some people can recall even the things of their past lives. Present forms. This is the form that we experience at this moment. It can be a visual, a sound, a smell, a taste, a touch, or a thought. Future forms. These are the expectations and of dreams of what we are going to do in the future. Examples: building a house, buying a car, marrying a good person, and so on. When we consider 6 kinds of forms, namely visuals, sounds, smells, tastes, touches, and thoughts, and these 11 types of forms, there are altogether 66 forms we experience. The second aggregate is the aggregate of feelings or sensation. In the context of the 5 aggregates, the aggregate of feelings means the, the feelings of forms because of the vibration of their particles. This means that we see, hear, smell, taste, touch, and think of different things because of the vibration of the particles of forms. The third aggregate is the aggregate of perceptions. This is the gathering of data of the forms which contact the sense organs. This includes data like color, size and shape of the visuals, types of sounds, smells, tastes, touches, and thoughts. The fourth aggregate is the aggregate of volitions. This is the analyzing of data of the forms gathered by mind. The fifth aggregate is the aggregate of consciousness. This is the identification of forms after gathering and analyzing data of the forms. For examples, a visual of a lady as my mother, my sister, my friend, my enemy, and so on. A sound as a sound of a violin, drum, singing, some machine, a voice of my mother, my father, and so on. A smell as a smell of a flower, a smell of a chemical, a smell of a rotten tin, and so on. A taste as a taste of a sweet food, a salty food, a sour food, a spicy food, a bitter food, and so on. A contact as a contact of a soft object, hard object, and so on. A thought as a thought of a wholesome act, unwholesome act, a kind act, a cruel act, and so on. In this way, we completely identify the forms which contact our sense organs. Identification of forms through the function of the five aggregates occur at every moment of our life. This process occurs so fast that we observe the five aggregates as one unit. The five aggregates function in all six sense organs. Therefore, we can describe the steps of the five aggregates with respect to sense organs. The aggregates of eye are visuals, feeling of visuals, perception of visuals, volition of visuals, and consciousness of visuals. The five aggregates of ear are sounds, feeling of sounds, perception of sounds, volition of sounds, and consciousness of sound. The five aggregates of nose are the smells, feeling of smells, perception of smells, volition of smells, and consciousness of smells. The five aggregates of tongue are taste, feeling of taste, perception of taste, volition of taste, and consciousness of tastes. The five aggregates of body are the touches, feeling of touches, perception of touches, volition of touches, and consciousness of touches. The five aggregates of mind are thoughts, feeling of thoughts, perception of thoughts, volition of thoughts, and consciousness of thoughts. Now let us study how the five aggregates become the five aggregates attached to lust, hatred, or delusion. How the Panchaskandha become Panchupadanaskandha. If we attach to pleasant things with lust, unpleasant things with hatred, and neutral things with delusion, the five aggregates become the five aggregates attached to lust, hatred, or delusion. Now let us study how the five aggregates and the five aggregates attached to lust, hatred, or delusion cause suffering. We have got a body and a mind. In other words, forms and a mind. We have got them as a result of wholesome and unwholesome energy we produce in our past lives. Our body and mind change against our will. Therefore, we suffer from dissatisfaction, frustration, and mental stress. Most of us usually understand this truth in our middle age or old age. When age in our body becomes weak, we often fall ill, our skin gets wrinkled, our hair falls or turns grey, and our memory declines. In the end, we die. We don't like any of these happenings, but they happen against our will, and we can't stop them. According to Buddhism, there are 11 great fires from which all the living beings suffer. They are the fire of lust, the fire of hatred, the fire of delusion, the fire of birth, the fire of aging, the fire of death, the fire of sorrow, the fire of lamentation, the fire of pain, the fire of grief, and the fire of despair. That is why the Lord Buddha has stated that the life in all the planes of existence is suffering and advised us to stop the sorrowful cycle of rebirth as soon as possible. Now let us study how the five aggregates attached to lust, hatred, or delusion cause suffering. If we attach to forms, namely visuals, sounds, smells, tastes, touches, and thoughts with lust, hatred, or delusion, the five aggregates attached to lust, hatred, or delusion. This mental condition can be called gratification or sensual pleasure. There are some drawbacks of gratification. Here they are. Gratification does not remain as we want. It declines, giving us mental suffering such as dissatisfaction, frustration, and mental stress. But ordinary people try again and again to gratify their sensual desires without knowing that it is an impossible task. While trying to gratify their sensual desires, they get involved in some of the following unwholesome activities, namely killing, stealing, sexual misconduct, lying, slandering, harsh speech, frivolous talk, covetousness, ill will, and false view. These unwholesome activities produce unwholesome energy which causes suffering to the doer sooner or later. Further, this unwholesome energy causes the continuity of the sorrowful cycle of rebirth. This is how the five aggregates attached to lust, hatred, or delusion cause suffering. In other words, this is how gratification or sensual pleasure causes suffering. That is why the Lord Buddha has stated that the five aggregates attached to lust, hatred, or delusion are suffering. In the case of enlightened people, they also have five aggregates, but they do not attach to them with lust, hatred, or delusion. Therefore, they do not produce rebirth energy. As a result, they experience eternal happiness. In conclusion, I would like to tell you what we should do to get rid of suffering. First, we should realize the three characteristics of the five aggregates of forms and mind. The first and the main characteristic of the five aggregates is that the things we like or love do not remain as we want. In other words, the things we like or love change against our will. This characteristic is called anicca in Pali language. The second characteristic of five aggregates of forms and mind is suffering. In other words, because the five aggregates change against our will, we have to suffer from dissatisfaction, frustration, and mental stress. This characteristic is called dukkha in Pali language. The third characteristic of the five aggregates is worthlessness or uselessness. Because the five aggregates of forms and mind change against our will and give us suffering, they are worthless. This characteristic is called anatta in Pali language. After we realize these three characteristics of the five aggregates, we should contemplate that the five aggregates change against our will. They give us suffering, and therefore they are worthless. Further, we should not attach to them with lust, hatred, or delusion. In other words, we should live without attaching to pleasant things with lust, unpleasant things with hatred, and neutral things with delusion. If we follow these instructions, we can lead a contented life, and a day will come when we will get rid of all sufferings and experience eternal happiness. May you attain enlightenment.